Tonight, the battlefield isn't the sky, it's the room with the gavel, the microphones, and the flags that decide how the world remembers a strike. Because after reports of U.S. and Israeli attacks on Iran, Russia didn't just issue a statement. It dragged the conflict into the most symbolic arena on earth, the United Nations Security Council, where every sentence is a weapon, every adjective is a legal claim, and every pause is a message to allies, enemies, and the markets watching in real time. In New York, an emergency Security Council meeting was set for Saturday afternoon, requested by Russia and China, supported by other members, chaired by the United Kingdom as monthly president, because Moscow's first goal is always to seize the framing before the framing seizes it. Russia publicly condemned the strikes as an unprovoked act of armed aggression. Language that sounds like outrage but functions like a legal trap, meant to brand the attackers as violators of the UN Charter and shift the global instinct from security to illegitimacy. And the moment that phrase hits the official record, it becomes diplomatic. Ammunition, quoted in capitals, repeated on television, and printed into policy memos that will decide sanctions, partnerships, and whether neutral states stay neutral. China's participation isn't about emotion either. It's about precedent. Because great powers fear the day today's logic is used against them, so Beijing and Moscow push the crisis into a rules-based courtroom they can control with procedure, vetoes, and narrative gravity, an arena where even if no binding resolution passes, the conversation itself still changes the cost of future action, and that is the hidden genius of UN warfare. You don't need to win the vote to win the story. Meanwhile, the UN Secretary General is expected to speak in the language of restraint, de-escalation, civilian protection, regional stability, because the UN's job is to pull leaders back from the cliff when every domestic audience is demanding toughness and every general is warning about risk. And here's the brutal tension that makes this moment so cinematic. The leaders involved will insist they had no choice, while diplomats insist choices still exist, and the Security Council becomes the stage where those two realities collide under bright lights. Russia's deeper objective is layered like a chess opening. Protect a partner, Iran, without firing a shot. Challenge U.S. Leadership by painting Washington as destabilizing, and force the conflict onto a table where Russia is guaranteed a seat, because the Council is one of the last global rooms where Moscow's relevance is structurally protected, and in power politics, relevance is survival. But the Security Council is also built on a cold truth. Vetoes make grand solutions nearly impossible. The US, Russia, China, the UK, and France can block what they fear. So the most likely outcome isn't a clean resolution that stops anything. It's something subtler and more dangerous. A hardened narrative split, a surge of diplomatic pressure on swing states, back-channel bargaining disguised as public outrage, and a world that begins organizing itself around competing versions of legitimacy. That's why this meeting matters to Americans and Israelis, even if they've learned to roll their eyes at UN speeches, because the UN doesn't have to command armies to change reality. It only needs to influence the coalition map who offers basing access, who shares intelligence, who sells parts, who votes with you, who abstains, who quietly drifts away. And in a crisis like this, drift is deadly. The public sees a strike and asks who hit whom, but the diplomatic class asks the more important question, who does the world blame? And what does that blame authorize next? Watch the choreography. Russia demands an end to military actions and a return to diplomacy, not only as principle but as strategy, because the longer the debate lives in the Council, the more every future move is haunted by the label aggression. And the more hesitant other states become to be seen as complicit. Watch the counter choreography too. Western allies will argue security imperatives, deterrence, and regional threats, because if they allow the aggression label to become default, they lose moral operating space they may need again. This is the modern geopolitical thriller. No one can fully control events on the ground, so they fight to control interpretation in the room, and interpretation becomes leverage in the next negotiation, the next arms package, the next sanction, the next corridor of cooperation. From here, diplomacy usually splits into three paths, and every path is tense. First, containment through back channels, where the UN meeting is the public theater, while real bargaining happens quietly between capitals trying to prevent the crisis from expanding. Second, narrative war, where the council becomes a recruiting ground for global opinion, turning states into camps and making compromise look like weakness. Third, escalation outruns diplomacy, where speeches become archival footage because the next incident lands faster than the next draft statement. And the terrifying part, what should force everyone to keep watching, is that each actor believes they can calibrate the next step, yet history is full of moments where the next step is taken for them by miscalculation, misunderstanding, or one event that pushes domestic pressure past the point of restraint. So when the gavel hits and the microphones turn on, don't listen only for condemnation. Listen for the architecture of the next month. Which words become repeated? Which countries align? Which ones hedge? And which ones quietly reposition? Because the Security Council isn't just a place where war is discussed. It's a place where the price of war is negotiated in public credibility, legitimacy, alliances, markets, and the fragile idea that rules still exist when fear is loud. If you want a single question that explains why this will pull viewers to the end, it's this. Does the UN session slow the crisis by creating an off-ramp, or does it harden the sides and lock everyone into a story they can't back away from without looking defeated? And if the story becomes a cage, what happens when the next headline arrives and nobody can afford to blink?